Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Erik Lukl, and today I'm doing another interview for Czech Metal Studies. This time, our guest is Erik Aadland. He is associate professor at Norwegian Business School, and his area of expertise is creative performance, social evaluations, and social networks. He also collaborated with Stojan Zgurev on articles and lectures devoted to the Norwegian black metal and music and black metal scene. And last but not least, Erik is also the bassist of a technical progressive metal band, Twisted into Form. Erik, welcome.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me.
Great to have you. Now, Erik, I want to start at the beginning. Could you tell us how you first got into metal?
Well, I think I got into metal as pretty much everyone else did in the very early 80s, starting to listen to Kiss around 1980. And yeah, then like most others, I guess, I just started listening to more and more extreme music, starting to get into Metallica and Slayer and Creator and Voivod and these kinds of bands. Very sort of similar development, I guess, that many others had at this time. And then, I started playing music too. We started a thrash metal band in 1988 called Decadence, and recorded some demos. And of course, we wanted to start to promote this band, and that's when I got into the extreme metal underground. And
Right.
of course, they didn't call it the extreme metal at that time. That's the concept and the term that's come much later, right? But yeah, at this time it was an underground scene, and it was very much international. I established a distribution network for my band. We had distribution through Wild Rags in the US, and we had distributor in Germany that I think eventually developed into Nuclear Blast or something, and distributor in Poland, and so on. And we corresponded with fanzines all over the world, basically. And also, of course, corresponded with other actors in the Norwegian underground scene at this time. Corresponded a lot with Thomas Haugen. He later became very well known for his work with Emperor, of course, and of course also corresponded a little bit with Øystein Aarseth, Euronymous, and so. I think what we have to recognize at this time in Norway, the underground metal scene was very, very small. It was very small. Not many bands at all. So yeah, there was some correspondence between bands and some concerts. We played some concerts locally in Oslo. One actually together with Dark Throne. And so, but yeah, it's this was before black metal really emerged, I think. It was extreme thrash metal and some death metal, right? You had Embryonic, the Emperor guys doing that, and of course you had Mayhem and Old Funeral in Bergen that eventually turned into Immortal and so on. But yeah, it was a small scene, I would say.
Right.
So that's how I got to metal, I guess.
Yeah, I think you were lucky to play a concert with Dark Throne because they don't do a lot of concerts.
Yeah, well, this was, I think, before they released Suicide Journey. It was around the time of the recording of the Cromlech demo, and of course, at this time they were playing more technical death metal, right? But yeah, it's there were so few bands, and the bands that played the more extreme music, they were sometimes lumped together on the same concert bill, right?
Right. And so what was the atmosphere like in the small community, underground community? Was it like friendly or competitive, or?
I would say it was it was characterized, I think, by a common interest in extreme music, and also curiosity. People wanted to discover new bands, and especially bands that were sort of had an interesting or a new or different sound. For instance, I remember very clearly when Entombed dropped their "But Life Goes On" demo, right? With, of course, they did some Nihilist stuff before that, but the "But Life Goes On" demo really showcased this Sunlight sound, right? And it was new sound, and it was a lot of people found that very interesting. And also, Nocturnus introducing synthesizers in their, Science of Horror demo and these things. Very cool stuff, very interesting stuff. And yeah, I think novelty was something that was highly regarded, right? And that, I think, also leads us a little bit to the sort of abandonment of death metal for many of these bands, right? Because death metal became so, a big trend, right? You got all the Sunlight bands, and you got all the bands from Morrisound and these things, and sounding very, very similar, and becoming got tons of bands sounding very similar, right? And that's what I think, especially the Mayhem guys reacted to, right? And they wanted to get away from that. And of course, Øystein, Forseth, and those guys, they were a little older than many of the other guys, right? We have to remember at this time too, many of these musicians, they were very young. They were teenagers, right? So they were quite young, and Øystein Forseth was a little bit older and maybe quite influential, right? So yeah, you're probably familiar with this infamous interview that they did in Slayer magazine. Was it Slayer number 9 or something? But they talked about how death metal was becoming so trendy, right? And they wanted a return to the more authentic old styles, right? And a lot of the other bands started to catch on to this, right? And abandoned their death metal bands and started more extreme, or what turned into black metal, right? So,
and so you mentioned, you mentioned Øystein. You also mentioned Samoth. So what other people who would later be part of the black metal scene did you know, or did you correspond with?
Yeah, so I corresponded also quite a bit with Håvard Ellefsen. He became also part of Emperor for a while, and then he started his own thing called Mortis. And who else? I don't know. I don't remember all the guys I corresponded. Talk to some of these guys too at the the local pub in Oslo, where these guys tend to hang out, to the Dark Throne guys, and talk to the guys in Mortem and so on. So, but it was very small, I think. It was very small. And it's, of course, now it's become such a big thing, and it's become you have all these myths surrounding it, and it's become quite mythical, and it's almost like sort of a romance around it, very romantic. But at the time, it was very small, and I don't think any of the bands that were pursuing this new music at this time had any idea that it would become so big. It was for the select few. It was very exclusive, and it was much more, I think, sort of pursuit of authenticity, and also sort of trying to make something that would differentiate them from everyone else. So it was also sort of like an identity project, I think. Very artistic, I think. So that when we look at it now, the fact that it turned into an even bigger trend and it becomes so huge, that's quite ironic. And that was never the intention, I think.
You mentioned, I think, quite truly that those were teenagers, essentially, at least at the beginning. So I was wondering, and there's also these myths surrounding Euronymous, what he was like, and so on. How did you see him personally, if you've from your experience?
So I only corresponded through, at this time, this was, of course, before internet and email and all these things. So we corresponded with, through traditional mail. And so that's what I did. And from what I remember, he was very curious about my band, he was always curious about new bands. Also, I remember going to the record store that he established, but I was not a regular there at all. I just stopped by, I believe, right after he had opened it or something, and there was almost no records there. It was nothing. So it was very sort of amateur type enterprise, I think. So I guess what's important to underscore here is that at this time things started to change, right? And some of these guys they started to hang, become more cliquish and hang more together. It started to become, I guess, more extreme too. And I noticed it too in the correspondence that I received through mail and so on. And at this time, I was a little older than some of these guys. And at this time, I decided that, this is not something that I'm interested in, pursuing. And I went to the university and so but of course, you hear through the grapevine about, the escalations and what's going on in these things. But I had, by this time, I had sort of opted out of the underground. I was pursuing academics, and so I was never part of the the Helvet scene or anything like this, and I actually quit corresponding with these guys at this time. So but I followed them, I checked out their releases and so on, and it was quite interesting. I mean, they really developed an original expression, I think. And at the time, of course, was fairly unnoticed. And then you have the big media scandal, and then everybody sort of notices it, and then things really changed, right? Then I guess teenagers and others that are find these extreme expressions interesting, get curious, right? And of course, then everything exploded, basically.
Yeah. So. And so you mentioned also that they became more cliquish, in your words. So they sort of alienated or became like took themselves out of the general metal underground, formed their own group. Was that the case?
That's so my impression, at least, that they sort of stuck together, and they developed their own aesthetic. I think to a certain extent they also started to develop their own morality, and so it really became sort of a subgroup, right?
So they stopped hanging out with the rest of you guys, and they.
Excuse me.
So they stopped hanging out with the rest of the metal underground and were just like on their own, essentially, or.
Yeah. So I don't really. I'm not really sure I can answer this because at this time I didn't really participate in the underground myself, so it's hard for me to know how much they sort of took part in that. But of course they started to get signed, and they started to record albums, and some of these bands also started touring, and other bands chose not to do any press or any touring at all. So I guess they started to sort of diverge a little bit and pursue different paths. And then it just grew, and of course as it becomes more visible and more known, you get new bands that start to do this, and some of them are of course more innovative, and others just copy what the original guys did, and you get different expressions, I guess.
Did you meet Dead or Varg Vikernes?
Never met Vikernes, but I remember I actually saw Mayhem play live once at Bootleg in Oslo. It was sort of a surprise gig after Dark Throne and Cadaver had played. So they just played like a spontaneous gig at Bootleg. I mean, I don't know, maybe 3-4 songs or something like this with the vocals. So that's one of the few gigs actually that they did, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was cool. It was interesting. I don't remember when it was, maybe in 91 or something. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. And so when the churches started burning, what did you think?
Well, I started hearing rumors about this, and that it was related to some of these guys and so on. I don't know. I guess I just thought that I probably did a smart move not to associate with those guys.
Okay. Because you mentioned that.
It took a while before. At least here in Norway at the time, these churches started burning, and no one had a clue, or at least the police and so on. I don't think they had a clue what was going on, and then of course Vikernes eventually went public about this, and then everything exploded, and I guess after that you got some copycat processes going on as well, maybe.
Okay, because you also mentioned that you knew Samoth, so
Yeah, that was before he called himself.
Before, yeah.
Yeah.
So you didn't correspond with him after, like, after?
No, I think I quit corresponding with him maybe in when was that? Maybe in early '92 or something.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. Now, what do you think about the film that was made about these events, Lots of Chaos? If you've seen it.
I did see it. Yeah, I don't know. I thought it was a bit too Hollywoodish, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. Apart from that, I don't really have an opinion. No.
Okay. Okay. All right. So maybe moving now away from black metal, you're also a scholar. And so your areas of academic interest, I'll repeat that again, is creative performance, social evaluations, and social networks. Could you tell us what that exactly means? Like, what do you research?
Sure. Yeah. So at least so far, I've had sort of maybe two research programs going, and one is about identity and social networks in advertising, and in particular, what I've been investigating together with some colleagues is the how social networks influence peer evaluations in awards contests, right? So you have all these advertising agencies competing for prestige, right, in these contests. And then what we have investigated is how networks or relationships between the competing candidates and the jury members influences jury assessments. And so this is work that I've done with Gino Catani and Simone Ferriani, and also Denise Falchetti. So it's sort of looking at how social networks interconnecting the candidates and audiences influences these social evaluations. So that's what I've been into, and also recently, together with Stoyan Zgurev and Giovanni Formilan, we have started to look more into organizational aesthetics, and in particular, how we can investigate color choices as a means of positioning your expression, your cultural expression, or your firm or your band or whatever it is that you're investigating, relative to reference groups in sort of an aesthetic space. So this is where we've investigated Norwegian metal album covers, and in particular Norwegian black metal, and looked at how Norwegian black metal bands use color to sort of develop a relational identity and position themselves relative to other bands in different metal genres and so on. So that's the recent work published in ASQ. And also together with Stoyan Zgurev, we've looked at how these black metal bands pursue authenticity, and how this explains escalation into extremity, right? And we analyzed this as a sort of a process. It's a process model where you can conceptualize it as sort of a sequence of choices between conformity and deviation, actually. And what we actually see, especially in the early Norwegian black metal scene, is that it's a process essentially of self-selection and exclusion, right? So some opt in to this process of upmanship and becoming more and more extreme, while others opt out, right?
Right. Yeah.
And we have already talked about this. I'm one of the guys that opted out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I was curious about that other article that you wrote on the color.
Yep.
Could you just very briefly summarize what your findings were?
Of course, this is not a big surprise. We find that there's an alignment between color choices and the sort of the aesthetic and the musical features of these bands, right? So black metal bands are much darker in their aesthetic choices than bands in other genres. Right. But the interesting thing is that the bands, they position themselves relative to bands in other genres. So what we actually see then is that it's a process of both association and disassociation. So what we see is that black metal bands appear to react to the color choices of bands in other genres.
Right.
And position themselves relative to this. They also make choices and positioning themselves in sort of in response to sort of external changes or external pressures. Mm-hmm. So what we see, for instance, is that these black metal bands, when stigmatization in the Norwegian society really increased in the early to mid 1990s, these black metal bands, they introduced more color in their covers.
Right.
And interestingly, when the genre becomes more commercial, more widely diffused or accepted, I guess, these bands appear to react to this as well and introduce more blackness and more dark colors again.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but the interesting thing about the positioning relative to bands in other genres is that they will tend to follow the color choices of bands in other genres up to a point, and after that they will withdraw and try to disassociate. So it is, I guess, or what the empirical patterns suggest is that these bands, they do sort of associate with metal as a genre, right? But only up to a point, after which they start to disassociate and become darker and I guess carve out their own sort of niche or identity in this aesthetic space.
Okay, thank you. Now I want to briefly talk about your own band, so Twisted Into Form. What is the meaning of the name?
The meaning of the name is it's just a name, I think, that we thought fitted our music. Okay. Of course, the name is inspired or maybe stolen from Forbidden's second album, which was called the Twisted Form.
Yeah.
But yeah, we really think it fits our expression and our music. And of course, Spiral Architect, another of these few bands in this genre. Spiral Architect is an old Black Sabbath song, right? So so we always get inspired by others, and but yeah, so that's the name of the band. We released an album in 2006 through Later's Edge in the US. This was exactly at the time when I don't know, all these what was it called? Spotify and all those streaming platforms emerged. So it sold next to nothing, and I think it just sort of went under the radar for a lot of people. It did get actually very good reviews from online fanzines interested in more progressive and technical metal and so on. But it's remained a very sort of obscure release, I think.
Yeah, is that the reason why there's such a huge gap, 10-year gap before you started, recording again, or?
Yeah. So, are you talking about us recording now? Is that what you're thinking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, we are actually making a new album now. It's I don't know. When we finished the album in 2000, we finished the album in 2004, and then it was released in 2006. And then Kai, the guitarist in Twisted Form, he moved to Portugal and lived in Portugal for many years. Then he came back, and eventually we started jamming again. I guess it's sort of it's part of our sort of artistic outlet, I guess, to try to do something. And now we're recording again. So it will be quite different, I think, from a lot of the stuff that's out there now. It's sort of it's metal. It's inspired by the kind of metal that we usually have listened to, more sort of older metal stuff, and a lot of jazz fusion, actually.
I hear a lot of jazz in that.
Yeah. So I'm a huge jazz fusion buff, I guess. Brandex and the Weather Report and all those, Mahavishnu Orchestra and Bruford and all that stuff. I love it. I think it's great. So a lot of that sort of trickles into our expression too, I think. And of course, old Fates Warning and the Cynic and stuff like this too. So it'll probably, hopefully, be released next year or something like this. We'll see. It takes time when you are doing it on your spare time, and
so none of you, it's none of the members have that as their primary job, I assume.
Oh no. It's we do this just because we want to, and we try to make stuff that we think sounds right to us, and hopefully someone else will like it too. But we're not trying to make something that will appeal to others. We really don't. And I think too that the new album will probably sound a little bit different from the old one. So that'll be interesting to see whether those few that actually really like the first one, whether they like the second one.
Okay, well,
maybe not.
We'll be looking forward to that. I'll definitely be checking that. All right, so Erik, thank you very much for the interview, and good luck in all your academic and musical endeavors.
Thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me to this interview. If anyone's interested, I would encourage them to check out, in particular, I think the ASQ paper on color. It's fairly, I think, innovative paper, an interesting paper, in my opinion.
Okay, yeah.
So, yeah, and twisted into form. If someone's interested, I guess they can find the stuff on YouTube. We are not on streaming platforms per se.
Yeah. All right. So thank you very much and enjoy your vacation.
Thank you, and the same to you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.